Hi, everyone. As always, I find webinars very weird because essentially what happens is I sit in my office and talk to myself and try and imagine what you are all thinking and saying. So the more you're sending questions through, the more you are participating, the easier it is for me. So so firstly, thank you so much for your time. I know that there is so much information out there, and it is actually overwhelming, even for my office, where we are constantly taking into consideration everybody's input and all the articles and commentary out there, both legal and business and political. It is absolutely overwhelming. And I have to tell you that in 16 years of doing work with distressed businesses, I've never seen anything like that. And we're going to get to that. So let me start by saying that the host of this network, of this webinar, is actually BAN Business Accounting Network. Now, those of you who don't know BAN, they are an accounting franchise. I work very closely with them. They are fantastic. The founder, Monique Charland, is really exceptional, and I have the pleasure of working with their franchisees quite closely. And each and every person that I deal with is a consummate professional. And so when they ask me to run webinars like this, I'm really quite honored, because they've got a huge network and they work with massive numbers of other people too. So just a little bit about me, other than the fact that I'm lovely. I've had more than 16 years experience as a commercial lawyer, and I've always focused on distressed businesses. So initially I was at ENS and I worked in their insolvency unit. I started my own practice in 2008, and more my practice has morphed into a practice that focuses on business problems. So we are often approached by businesses in distress. In fact, a large proportion of our practice does deal with that. I've got a very strong employment law department as well as a strong commercial department and litigation department. So those four departments work together to really help businesses in distress and to deal with general work as well. But primarily what we do is we look at the various problems that businesses may have, and we then go in with a multidisciplinary approach. So if I am looking at a business and I can see, well, actually it's not a legal problem, it's an accounting problem, or it's a marketing problem, or it's a problem, a tax problem, something that I don't specifically deal with, then I'll call in one of my contacts to assist. So it really is more of a strategic, it's become more and more of a strategic advice giving organization, more than just a plain law firm. So let's start with the absolute very, very basics, okay? You'll get these slides, but just to let you know what actually is COVID-19. So people are just so full of nonsense. So if some people will say it's just the flu, other people will say it's the epidemic that will wipe out humankind. So just a little bit about it. It is a viral respiratory illness, and it is something that is spread by people in close contact. There is currently no vaccine, and you can't take an antibiotic because this is a virus. It's not a bacteria. The incubation period is between 2 and 14 days. So why do we all panic about COVID-19? It's not so much the actual virus. It is the virus itself, but the main issue is the speed and the ease with which it spreads. It's particularly dangerous to people who've got an underlying health condition. So if you've been treated for cancer, if you have diabetes, I'm diabetic, so I'm incredibly careful about where I go and what I do, and then you've also got, obviously for the elderly, it's very dangerous. But more than that, our country doesn't have the infrastructure that other countries have to enable us to deal with the fallout from something like this. So it is a nightmare. I don't know about you, but the economy went from being, troubled at 5 o'clock on Sunday to an absolutely like completely different ball game by 9 o'clock on Monday morning. By 9 o'clock on Sunday night. So what I've noticed, I have to tell you that I've never seen anything like this. So businesses went from being maybe struggling but limping along. By 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I had been contacted by 3 or 4 businesses who were in distress, and they'd gone from being okay to absolutely hitting the wall within basically overnight. Our own business has seen a shrinkage in certain areas, so clients are putting big projects on hold because they don't want to spend money, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So for those of you that don't know, we are now we've now had the president declare a state of disaster, and we have got travel bans in place. So there's a whole list of countries that are on this list. The ones that are particularly worrying are the bans against the United States, the United Kingdom, China. Those are the ones that really, really impact us, because those are the ones where we are dealing with trade partners. Gatherings of more than 100 people are prohibited. Large events and celebrations are cancelled. Schools are closed, which is, the learners are all very happy. Parents who already don't want the coronavirus are now stuck in a rock and a hard place. They're either stuck with their kids for extra time, or, they're also all, a lot of people are self-isolating. So there's a lot of pressure building up. Not that you don't want to be stuck with your kids, I'm sure they're lovely, but the truth is that there's additional pressure being placed on people who are working to try and balance everything. Universities have shut their doors. As you know, there's a big hoo-ha at the moment about the fact that students were given 72 hours to clear out of res and get home, and students at the University of the Witwatersrand have already challenged that in court, successfully challenged that in court. So it's not great. Business have been called on to take measures to intensify hygiene control. Primarily what that means is different for every business. The main thing to look at is you've got to actually make sure that your workplace is safe. And that includes everything from washing hands, hand sanitizer, masks if necessary, making sure that where you have got staff who travel by public transport, that you've got measures in place to assist them. Then it all becomes a little bit post-apocalyptic when you look at the surveillance and testing systems. A lot of our ports are shut, and now you can only sell liquor between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. You can have no more than 50 people in a restaurant or club or tavern, and you can't even apply for a special or events liquor license during this period. So it's really overnight become a completely different economy. So the biggest concerns for business, and I think Shane's going to pop up some polls at this point. The biggest concerns for businesses that I've seen are the sudden drop in income, the impact on the labor force, or the fact that businesses have become immediately distressed, and there's the sense of panic. And the sense of panic makes it very difficult to think clearly. At this point, people are essentially believing everything they see, everything they hear. They are not discerning. People are just hysterical. The cash cycle within the country is basically ground to a halt. And we're 5 days into this, and some people are saying yes, common sense will prevail. I think it's very difficult for common sense to prevail when people are genuinely concerned that their livelihoods are under threat. So let's have a look at some of these. And I'm going to try and not have this, the purpose of this webinar is not necessarily for me to give you answers, but it's for me to give you things that you need to consider. And before I go any further, I want to just say to you that there's a difference between your company and your business. And that's very important. So if you have to liquidate or mothball or deregister or stop using your company for or CC for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that your business is dead. And I think a lot of people are thinking, well, if I close my company, I'm not going to have a business. There are other ways of structuring things so that your business might be able to continue. So let's have a look at the kind of things that we're dealing with. So the first thing is the drop in income. So it's not just the fact that income has dropped, but it's the uncertainty over the period of which this drop of income will last. So, you know, even the best businesses have got some kind of, you know, obviously the best businesses have got cash reserves, but those cash reserves only last for a period of time. I mean, obviously, if you are Pick and Pay or Woolworths or, you know, one of the very big companies, you will most likely have cash reserves that will last for quite a while. And also they have because they're retailers, it's, you know, their businesses are ongoing. It'll be interesting to see what happens to businesses that are reliant on consumers and big businesses. So Ster-Kinekor, New Metro, shopping malls in general, how are they going to cope with this? So let's have a look at some examples. So you've got to take, and these are people that have got hold of me. So I haven't had a call from a restaurant yet, but that's because I think everyone's still stunned from yesterday's announcement. So you look at your takeaway vendor. So, you know, I work in, my office is in Claremont in Cape Town, and all around there are takeaways, there are sort of your, you know, like your Fridays and your McDonald's and things like that. The other day I drove to work I live in Durbanville and work in Claremont. If I leave my house at 8 o'clock, it will take me an hour and 40 minutes to get into the office. On Tuesday, I left my house at 8 o'clock and I was in work before 9. At work before 9. And that is because people are just not on the roads. People were already starting to self-isolate, even though the schools weren't closed. Officially, some schools had already closed. Parents were keeping their kids home. So when I drove into Claremont during peak hour traffic, I was one of about 15 cars. And that reality is what's shaking businesses that have got access to the public. So suddenly you know, the guys that are offering takeaways, even in high foot traffic areas like Claremont, they're just not getting clients. There's no one there. There's no one to service. So the reality then becomes that people, suddenly there's just nobody to service. And I think the gentleman that raised the question about his dance studio, that's what he's experiencing. I was approached by an events company, a very large events company, and on Friday they had many millions of rands of income on their books. By 9 o'clock on Monday morning, they had zero. Every single large event for the calendar year had been cancelled. Every single one. They went from having a thriving business to no business within 48 hours. Now, no business can, you know, very few businesses can survive that. I mean, that is just unprecedented. Then let's take a look at professional services firms, and I'm going to use my law firm as an example. We are having additional problems getting our cash in. I've phoned some clients, some of them long-standing clients, and said, look, you know, you missed your payment deadline. And they were like, Robin, I'm sorry, we're not paying. We don't know when we're going to get paid, and so we're holding on to our cash. So, you know, those are, which is not necessarily the wisest thing to tell an insolvency lawyer, but be that as it may. The reality is that people are holding on to their cash. They're not spending. There's just a sudden sense of, if I don't have cash in my business, I can't function. But that obviously has a knock-on effect. Some of my very big projects have been put on hold. Some clients have contacted me and said, look, we're not prepared to pay money for legal services, or we can't pay money for legal services anymore. We're going to settle, or we're going to, you know, can you take us to this point, and then we're going to deal with it ourselves. So even your professional services firms who you'd think were more recession proof. So everyone needs an accountant. If you're dealing with a lawyer, you're not dealing with a lawyer because you were bored and needed to make friends. You're dealing with a lawyer because there's something very specific on the go. Same with medical professionals. Suddenly you were going to go to the dentist for your checkup, for example, but now you're like, I don't know, I might need my medical savings account to help me deal with the impact of getting the flu. So, everything's being dealt with. Transport providers, Uber, taxis, airlines, all of these businesses are suddenly going from being fairly, essentially thinking they're things that people would always need, to actually when people have to make very difficult decisions, it's amazing what they can do without.
The question was, what is your biggest concern for your business? The big one was lack of payments coming in. 51% opted for that one. And then the next popular selection was the shrinking client base, 37%. 8% selected other, but I haven't actually been able to determine what those others were. You guys need to just type those through, please. And then 4% how and where to cut costs. So there we go. I hope that helps, Robin. Back to you.
Thanks. Yeah. So let's have a look at the situation before COVID-19 hit. Don't worry, guys, we will get to something a little bit less depressing. So, please just fuss bait for a little bit. So before COVID-19, we'd already had an increase of 13.8% in liquidations and insolvencies for the 3-month period ended the 31st of January 2020, as opposed to 2019. Businesses were already barely hanging on because of the water crisis, load shedding, general costs of doing business were increasing. When distressed businesses come to me, a lot of businesses were essentially funding their business through SARS. They were just not paying their tax, which sounds A, very scary, and B, desperate. Because if you're not paying SARS, you really are scraping the bottom of the barrel to stay alive. And SARS is now chasing, and they're chasing and chasing and chasing because they also have targets to meet, which is putting massive pressure on businesses. A lot of businesses had already used all their reserves before this outbreak. So they'd already done what they needed to do to get through the water crisis. Some people had already borrowed money to, if they were dependent on water for the provision of services, they'd already borrowed money. Load shedding, people have spent hundreds of thousands of rands on generators and working around systems and trying to find ways to do business where you're not badly affected by the load shedding. So by the time COVID-19 came around, businesses they're tired. They're hanging on by their fingernails. So let's have a look at things to consider. So what we're going to need to do is you're going to need to not do what 90% of business owners do when the paw hits the fan. And that is, you actually need to sit and take a long, hard look at your business, at your company. Can you hold out for the next 6 months with your current income and your projected income? Now, one of the things about business rescue is that the requirement is that if you can't see your business functioning over the next 6 months, you have to consider business rescue. The Companies Act says you have to consider it. If you choose not to go with business rescue, you actually have to let your creditors know why you're not going to go. But that's go with business rescue. But that is something that the whole business rescue, liquidation, turnaround, those kind of questions are questions that are more in depth than we're going to go through here. So the other questions you need to have a look at is what costs can you cut and what will it cost you to cut those costs? So, a lot of businesses go, okay, I'm going to retrench. Well, that's fantastic. That is an option. It's a horrible option because I think you will have heard me say this before, but I saw an interview a couple of years ago where one of the politicians was being interviewed with regards to the role of small businesses in the economy. And they said, big businesses pay salaries, but small businesses feed families. And that's true. We all know if your staff complement is relatively small, You know your team members. You know who they're married to, and when they've got kids, and who's studying and who's doing what, and what kind of things have happened in their personal lives. So retrenching isn't just a numbers exercise. It really is a very, very difficult thing. The other thing to consider is, what are your retrenchment costs? So remember that retrenchment isn't sucks to be you, goodbye. Retrenchment is a consultative process. It takes time. There are notice periods involved. If you've got staff that have worked for a while, I mean, you've got 1 week per year completed. So if you've got someone who's worked with you for 10 years, that means that they are most likely, on top of notice period, going to get 10 weeks or 9 weeks of severance pay. So it's not something that produces immediate results. It may make things worse before it makes things better. And people don't always realize that. So when they sit and calculate the costs of retrenchment, that in and of itself can cripple a business. The hardest thing to ask is, can you pay your creditors? If you cannot pay your creditors, can you negotiate with them for increased payment terms? I mean, lengthened payment terms. So, can you agree to pay off an amount? Are you able to come to some kind of trade exchange arrangement? Are you able to come to some kind of agreement with your creditors, the way you actually are creating a payment plan and sticking to it? If you can't, you have to put your business into liquidation. The long and the short of it is that, in terms of the law, if you can't pay your debts as and when they fall due, you are commercially insolvent. And the law says if you can't pay everybody, you shouldn't pay anybody. So if you are in that position, you need to get advice very quickly. But before you panic, the next question you need to ask yourself is, are there costs you can cut? And are there assets you can liquidate? Do you have some assets that are easily liquidated, but within the business, not your personal assets, within the business? And the other thing to look at, have you seen from yesterday that there are certain goods upon which there are bans and limitations when it comes to price increases? So that certain groceries, hand sanitizers, surgical masks, and it's a broad range of things. So if you're a retailer, are you you can increase by the cost of input. So if it starts costing you more to bake a loaf of bread, for example, you can increase the cost by how much more it costs you, but you can't increase your profit margin. So you can't increase your profit margin to help balance the costs the other costs that you're incurring. So it's not like you can increase the price of your loaf of bread to help you deal with your staff costs. That's not necessarily going to work. The next question is, can you mothball your business? So in other words, if you were to stop trading completely, are the overheads which would continue to tick over manageable for you to carry until the threat is over and then you completely start again? Is that something you can look at? So when we have a look at what can businesses consider, your 3 main options are going to be informal turnaround. So then you approach your accountant and an attorney and you say, look, I need to either mothball this business, I need to turn it around, I need you to help me put together information that will help me make a good decision, or you need to consider business rescue. Business rescue is more complex. It does freeze debts, which everybody likes, but it doesn't freeze any suretyship obligations that you may have. And you also need post-commencement funding. You need funding to allow for the business rescue process to run. And then there's a liquidation. And a liquidation is where your business is wound up. A liquidator is appointed, and then the assets in the business are sold and creditors are paid. So the options, what are your options? The truth of the matter is you need to make decisive and bold decisions. Now is not the time to stick your head in the sand. Now is the time to go, okay, I am 100% committed to getting my business through this, and I am going to act decisively. Because the only way to deal with fear is through action. If you don't know what to do, doing nothing is never the right answer. If you are worried about your business, like being paralyzed with fear is not going to help you. If you're not prepared to ask the difficult questions of your business, you will never make it through. And when I speak to businesses, they're very quick to say, oh, well, I think it'll be okay. Or, oh, yeah, no, I think my clients will, they'll still do business with me. What you think is actually irrelevant. It's what information have you put together to know the answers. So now is also not the time to start like just winging it. You can really increase your business's liability hugely if you're going to take extreme measures and you don't take proper advice. And I have to tell you, I can't even, like, you would be absolutely astonished if I had to tell you how many times we get clients who have come to us after they've made mistakes, after they've got things wrong. It just isn't, it's actually just pretty crazy, really. So if you're going to retrench, get an employment lawyer or a labor consultant on board. Don't just, think you know what to do. Get somebody to help you. Speak to your accountant. Know what your business position is financially. Look at your management accounts as opposed to just putting them in your email folder that says management accounts. Actually look at them. And if you're considering putting your own money into the business to keep it afloat, look at your return on investment. Ask yourself, can I recover the funds? Would I put this money into my business if I didn't own it? If I were an investor, would I invest in this business? And those are hard questions, because if you start selling your own assets and it doesn't work and you're putting more money into the business and the business still doesn't work, because we all think, oh, okay, I just need some cash. You don't know how much cash you need and for how long. If you put your own money in the business, you're impoverishing yourself should something happen. Obviously, if you can give your business a cash flow injection and you believe that that will help and you've consulted your accountant, that's a different story, but you need to make a decision that's well thought through. So now we've got staff members. Everybody is mildly hysterical about this, and I don't blame you. I was mildly hysterical about this too. It took me a lot. I had to sit and figure it out. I'm lucky to have Lee Marcus, my employment expert, in my office, obviously. So he, whilst advising millions of clients, was also advising me, because you immediately want to do something because nobody wants to get sued. So what do? There's a very basic rule, and this is an oversimplification, but it will help you. If there is a medical certificate involved, it is sick leave. So if that person has COVID-19 or has been advised by their doctor that they have some symptoms or are very high risk, they've been exposed, then that's quarantine, and they're being they have to self-isolate. Then if there's a medical certificate, it's sick leave. If there is no medical certificate, if someone decides to self-quarantine because they've come into contact with a high-risk individual and there's no medical certificate, but the staff member can actually work from home and continue to meet targets and meet their KPIs, then it's no leave. Then if they can work, it's working from home. But just be careful that your staff members are not technically working from home, but not meeting the targets that they normally set. So if they have to bill a certain amount of time, they must still bill that time. You may have to do a combination between working from home and short time, some kind of negotiation around that, because if somebody can't fill a whole day with the work that they are currently doing at home, then they're not working a full day, and then you need to have a look at what your options are with regards to the part of the day that they're not working. If there is no medical certificate and the staff member is unable to work from home, then they can take annual leave and thereafter unpaid leave. And I think that that's something that is the reality. If somebody doesn't have enough sick leave and they don't have enough annual leave, then all they can ask for is unpaid leave. And businesses are not expected to assist somebody indefinitely. So if 14 days is something, 14 days is something most businesses can manage. But if it becomes longer, or if there are all kinds of other complications that arise with regards to the amount of time that the person has to take off, the business is entitled to assess what they can and can't do. Again, please, can you just take some advice? You can't just tell someone they can't come to work. You can't just tell someone they must take unpaid leave. You can't just tell someone that they must come to work. There are things that have to be considered in each and every case. And yeah, there have to be difficult decisions, but they have to be had.
Okay, so there we go. Results of that poll. Thank you for your participation. It was a multiple selection poll, so you could select more than one option. You could select all 4 options if you wanted. But just to share with you, 80%, the clear favorite there is sanitizer and hygiene options, which I'm sure you'll be quite pleased to see, hey, Robin? 80% have selected that. Instituting working from home, 45%. Now, I know some of you are going to say, but that doesn't add up to 100. Remember, this is not a single selection poll. It's a multiple selection poll, so you could select more than one. It's just giving you a bit of a, what's popular kind of thing. Other, we've got 25%. I'll have a look at what those others are in a sec. Retrenchment, we've got 8%.
So one of the things you need to remember is, as employers, you have an obligation to provide a safe and healthy working environment. So that can look different in every single business. So in some businesses, hand sanitizer is enough, and access to running water and encouraging people to wash their hands. In some businesses, that's not enough. If you have huge quantities of huge numbers of staff, your options are more limited. If you have a big corporate, a lot of the time you're putting people on rotation. Some people come in, some people don't. So in each and every case, you have to have a look at what is practical for your business, and also what falls within a safe and healthy working environment. So, for example, my business has got 10 people. We've instituted if in any way you feel unwell, stay at home so you don't infect us policy. And other than that, we have a large part of my team are able to work from home, if need be. We've also put in there. I've never seen so many hand sanitizers in one room in my life. And also what we've done is for one of our staff members who normally uses public transport, we've allowed them to use the company vehicle on a limited basis, because obviously that's got all kinds of tax implications. I can hear the ban listeners clutching their chests and falling to the floor, but it's a limited process. So then, what is the thing to do for immediate business distress? As I said here before, the best antidote to fear is taking action. If you sit around wondering and panicking and hoping and, hoping that everything's going to be okay, then it's not going to work. So this is the time to get hold of your accountant and ask for their expertise. So ask the questions that scare you if you've not already done so. What is my break-even point? If you don't know what your break-even point now's the time to find out. Which of my costs are non-essential? So do I need to cancel certain things that I normally put in place? So, for example, do I need to cancel my water cooler? Do I need to look at reducing the number of subscriptions on software? What can I do that's non-essential? Then ask yourself, can I reduce my salary bill? Can I negotiate with my staff to take a pay cut for a while? Can I negotiate with my staff to go on short time, to take unpaid leave? And again, you need to have a look at what options are available to you there. Then what is my tax position? Do you owe SARS money? If you owe SARS money and a whole lot of other people money, then you have a problem. Ask your accountant, well, how long is my cash cycle? And how can I shorten it, and what would the cost be? Okay, eggs are not part of this, that should be EG, but apparently eggs are very full of proteins. If you're feeling a bit weak and feeble, have an egg. For example, can you afford an early settlement discount? Can you build that in? Can your margin take that? Can your margin actually take the fact that you say to your clients, if you pay in the short term, if you pay before 30 days, we'll give you a 5% discount or a 10% discount. But don't give discounts if it's going to make your business unprofitable. You have to know what your gross profit percentage and your net profit percentages are, and all of these very exciting things. And you can't guess those. You need to ask your accountant if you don't know that already. Also remember that if you start offering early settlement discounts, you may or may not be falling into the category of the National Credit Act. Don't panic. It's not necessarily the case, but do get hold of an attorney just to bounce that off them. Then you can only cut costs to a certain point. You need to look at increasing revenue. So the first is, what is your low-hanging fruit? If you can't have, for example, your dance class, can you charge a subscription, even if it's a low subscription each month, to have online, an online webinar much like this, saying, okay, these are the steps for the week. This is how we're going to run it. Here's the if we're going to prepare, let's do an online dance off, whatever it is. I mean, it may or may not work. I don't know people's businesses to that extent. What are your low-hanging fruit? So for us, there's certain things that we can do quickly and easily in order to generate some income, not a huge amount, but some income that will assist us in the short term. Have a look at diversifying your income stream. So it may well be that project that you've been having in the background, that you've been thinking about in the background, as long as it's not capital intensive, now may be the time to launch it. So, for example, you were going to, in any event, launch individual options for individuals, or start doing all your consultations online, or offering clients discounts for online consultations or online services. Now's the time to do it. We've been speaking to some educational institutions about maybe doing online story reading or storytelling, or teaching parents and nannies how to play certain educational games or do educational activities with kids while they're at home. The other thing is, speak to other people, share your knowledge. People get so panicked under these circumstances that they absolutely refuse to tell anyone how scared they are. So often what's starting to happen is people will phone me and they'll say, okay, so for example, I need a set of terms and conditions, because now there's the coronavirus. People need to know how I do business. And after a few minutes and a few probing questions, the question isn't really, I need terms and conditions. The question is, actually, my business is severely distressed. Will terms and conditions help me now? How do I get myself out of this? What is the best thing to do? How do I make sure that my clients start paying me? Ask the right questions, and ask them, if you're going to invest in an hour of an attorney's time, or a finance professional's time, or whatever it is, that's a really good investment, considering that you'll need that investment in order to make decisions. Online platforms and online marketing become your very best friends. I've seen so many innovative actions being taken by, for example, business networks where they're going online, where they're having online events. My partner lives in the UK, and his trip to see me over Easter has obviously been cancelled, and I have a trip planned to go there, and that may also be cancelled. So he sent me a link to he's a techie, so I mean, I still have to decipher what he sent me, but it allows us to feel as though we are watching TV together. So if you can do that in a relationship, not that I recommend it, but if you can do that, if you can make options available so that when you're essentially isolating or separated from somebody you care about, you can do those kind of options for clients and as part of your business. So what I've done is I've kept this, which is basically now leads me to questions. I've kept this particular webinar quite short and provided quite a bit of time for questions, because I would imagine that the most value that you're going to get out of this is having free access to a real live lawyer for 20 minutes. So if are there any questions that you would like to ask me? Otherwise, I do have some other information that I can get. both of you, the reality is that clients are going to have to invest in, they're going to have to think creatively. One of the things that I would suggest that people do under those circumstances is actually ask questions. Ask questions from your clients. What would you be interested in? What kind of things do you want to do to try and get through this period? Do you want to have a look at options that will make a difference to you? So I've become absolutely, my best friend at the moment is my online marketing company. I speak to them 3 times a day. I have a look at what's coming through, what's making a difference. We've instituted additional measures to get to clients, but the reality is you can't just guess. So opportunities and how you're going to deal with this, either you need to see how far you can get with diversification. And then, Diane, I need to tell you that if your clients are not able to weather the storm, then they need to speak to somebody about how best to deal with the risk involved in running a business under circumstances where you are actually not able to make payments to creditors, where you are having a look at what kind of costs to cut. This isn't the time to guess. This is the time to actually get the professional advice that you need. Paul, you're not entitled to rent relief necessarily. You'd have to negotiate that with your landlord. There's a huge thing at the moment about force majeure or intervening, supervening impossibility. So what that means, force majeure is where something actually prevents you from working. So for complying with your requirements in terms of an agreement. So acts of God, sometimes they're called acts of God. So there you would look at a fire or, lightning bolts or war or something like that. Now, the thing to bear in mind is not being able to pay your debts is not because of the coronavirus, isn't necessarily an act of God or a supervening impossibility, because it's where you would look at at an express case of maybe a supervening impossibility would be something like you are reliant on something that's specifically banned. So if you were waiting for if you were hosting an international guest and that international guest can no longer come into the country, that might be considered, and so you can't perform an event and therefore you can't pay your suppliers. That may be an act of God, or an act of God or a supervening impossibility. But my business is slowing down because I can't make sales, because I have because the coronavirus has eroded my client base. That doesn't immediately, from a legal perspective, fall within that category. So, Paul, you would have to negotiate with your landlord. I'm finding that landlords are actually quite open. It depends who your landlord is, to giving rent breaks or rent reductions. But unless there's most lease agreements don't allow for that, so you would have to negotiate that. And if your landlord is open to it, you need to get it in writing and preferably signed by both you and your landlord. But no, you're not entitled to it as a matter of law. It's a negotiation issue. Okay, Shane? Oh, sorry. We are planning on, this is Paul. I don't know if it's the same Paul or a different Paul. We are planning to close our company for an indefinite period of time. We are trying to make this fair on staff and ourselves by using some of the time off as paid annual leave, some paid time off which we won't deduct from their leave owing, and some unpaid leave. Do we need to get the staff to sign an agreement for this arrangement, or is it sufficient to have a staff meeting, discuss the idea, and have a verbal agreement? Paul, absolutely without a doubt, a written consent to anything like that would have to be recorded. You are required to have these discussions. Your unpaid leave or short term or anything like that is sort of a subsection, a category of retrenchment, in the sense or of an amendment to the employment contract or employment terms with your employees. So you do have to consult with them. If you need to have a look at the best possible way forward, then what I would do is just get some input. I know there are quite a few labor consultants on this call, and give them a call and just ask for some assistance in how you put that together. I must commend you on the fact that you're looking at various options for your staff so that you're able to keep the business going for as long as possible. When you're doing this, just remember to not to only look at staff costs, but your overheads that you can't get rid of. Okay, David, can you provide clarity on the 6 p.m. closing of restaurants, please? Some seem to think that the regulations mean that they should simply stop serving alcohol, and some think that it means the restaurant should close at 6 p.m. David, I actually don't know the answer to that because it only came in yesterday and I haven't had a chance to look at that very, very closely. If I had to shoot from the hip, and I must put the legal disclaimer in that this is not legal advice. If you do want legal advice, please contact your lawyer. That's the fine print. I would say that my understanding is that the restaurants actually have to close, not just stop serving alcohol. And in any event, they're not entitled to have groups of more than 50 at a time in their establishment. But David, what would be a good idea is for you to maybe email me, and then I can get back to you on that once I've had a proper look at it. Linda, I'm a small consulting company. My clients have sent staff home, but they also have and encouraged staff to work from home. I'm not able to attend to physical work on site. Other clients, but put projects on hold. Yeah. I run a tight ship on cash flow, low overheads, but stars and the like still expecting their piece of the pie over which we have no control. Linda, I'm afraid that is a reality. And that is, oh, sorry, Melanie, I'll come back to you. I didn't see your question. That is a reality. There is some costs don't go away. So remember, if your income decreases, the amount you have to pay SARS decreases. Your overheads, your landlord or any other overheads that you can't cut, they will still run. And unfortunately, you are looking at a situation where you're going to have to look at for how long you can sustain your reduced income. And if you can't sustain it for sort of indefinitely, then you're going to need to make some tough decisions around how to continue or not to continue your business at this point. Also, do you remember that that there's going to be a reassessment of the position towards mid-April? Nobody at this point knows what the reassessment will look like, and you need to be prepared for good or bad news under those circumstances. But it's definitely worth having considering what would reassessing your position closer to mid-April. Would you encourage face-to-face staff meetings? Melanie, I would. I wouldn't necessarily encourage speaking to your staff as a group. In some ways, it may be easier or it may be more practical to speak to people face-to-face, one-on-one, because you may have slightly different options for people, different staff members, and also take it from someone that does this a lot, not necessarily retrenchment consultations, but consultations with staff that are about to become unemployed as a result of liquidation. The reality is that staff in a big group, in big numbers, it's often very difficult. But it is going to depend on the nature of the discussion, the number of people, how many people are in specific groups of staff members or categories of staff members. But I would always recommend a face-to-face meeting, even if that face-to-face meeting is held with a professional there. So just to have somebody there to answer questions or to help you feel a bit more equipped to deal with any questions. Other for me, this is Nicola, we are a non-profit and we are concerned that donors pull our funding as their businesses decline. Nicola, I think that's very likely. We have a situation where we're assisting a non-profit where the funding has suddenly become very uncertain and decisions are having to be made around retrenchments and liquidations and things like that. Again, Nicola, just because you're a non-profit doesn't mean you have to that you don't have to look at the same things as a for-profit enterprise. So what I would suggest there is that you have a look at and get undertakings or get some kind of understanding from funders and donors what their funding obligations or their funding and intentions are going forward. Also remember that if you have a signed agreement, that agreement still with your funder or donor, that agreement still is in effect. Not, they can't just pull their funding if they have agreed to fund for a certain period. A contract is still valid no matter how many viruses there are. And enforcing your agreement is something you're entitled to do. But what do you do when you run out of work? Raymond, if you run out of work and you're not able to pay your creditors, then you are going to have to look at taking some very serious and drastic steps around trying to turn your business around liquidation, around business rescue. And that's something that you are going to need to get individual advice, specific advice on. It's not something that I can tell you as we sit here. Olivia, I have an upcoming tax payment of 50,000 Rand that is due to SARS by the end of the month. Is there a way of halting the payment for a later time? Sadly, no, but what you can do, Olivia, is make contact with SARS and see whether they, whether you would be, if you don't make the payment, you would incur the penalty and the interest. And then if you need to pay that amount off, you can approach SARS with regards to a deferment of payment. But that is something you should definitely contact one of the band franchisees about, because they will be able to advise you very clearly on that. Anthony, we negotiated with our staff to add in extra hours once we do reopen our dance studio to make up for the hours that have been paid for at present but not worked. That's great. That's an innovative way of dealing with things. As long as your staff have consented to that, that you've got that in writing, and that you've taken some advice around the legalities of that specific decision. I don't know all the terms. The terms of that decision. Janice, I was expecting a tricky question from you. What is the UIF stance on the unpaid period for social distancing that is not covered by annual or sick leave? I do not know the answer to that. I'm going to give you some kind of indication. The UIF's position, as far as we know, is that this would be treated as a temporary layoff and that it may be covered by UIF. However, they are going to require proof that the time off was not purely elective. So it can't just be, oh, I've decided, no, thank you, I don't want to come to work. What I would do there is put in a call to Lee Marcus, who does our employment law work. Janice, you have a relationship with him, not with everyone else listening, not that kind of relationship, a working relationship with him, and see whether or not, and get some clarity from him. It is a very, very, very tricky question, and the government is trying to use UIF to alleviate some of the burden on employers, but it's something that's tricky. But again, you need to keep a thorough record of what of what has been agreed to, so that you've got all the ins and outs recorded if you're going to have a look down the line. Does the onus of responsibility on the employer remain purely at showing reasonable consultation attempts to reach a consensus on implementing innovative methods to cut costs while retaining employees and continuing business activities, even if it's just in a reduced capacity? So, Janice, that would be something that you would need to consult, absolutely. you would have to then have a look at what the outcome would be if people refuse, and then whether you would have to resort to or be forced to then retrench. So that would be part of a discussion of, these are the options we're putting on the table. If you can't agree to that, or it's something that you're not prepared to do, then we are going to have to look at retrenchment. So it is part of a larger discussion around what you would do in respect of your staff, where there's a need to reduce staff costs in the same way. Anon, that would be very much similar to Janice's question. You're always going to have to act reasonably. You can't just break all the rules or act rashly because COVID-19 is on the scene. It's the standards of conduct remain the same. Do you know yes. Marie, I actually don't know anything about the government initiatives because they were supposed to announce them yesterday, and I've not seen any indication of what those initiatives are going to be. Insofar as I'm aware, we should be expecting some kind of announcement from the government imminently. I was hoping that was going to be yesterday. So no, I don't have any more information on that. Olivia, please, not getting your rental in is the same as not getting paid by any client. So what are the options that you need to use? You need to demand payment. If it's a commercial lease, it's a bit easier. If it's a residential lease, then it becomes trickier, and the courts have put evictions on the back burner, and that's something that is going to cause massive damage. So if it's a commercial property, you would demand payment. If there's no payment made, then you would look at evicting your tenant. My advice to you would be, rather than running straight to court, is to, if a tenant stops paying because they've run out of cash, then what I would suggest you do is then look at whether or not you can negotiate with your tenant for a reduced rental for a period. It's really going to be all about what you can and can't do in order to keep your rental business afloat.
Thank you for the positive feedback there, guys. We've got an excellent rating that's come through. Thank you very much indeed. That is fantastic.
Shane, thank you so much for your work on this. Jenna and Monique and the rest of the team at BAN, thank you for this opportunity. And guys, just keep on keeping on. If you need help and advice, do contact the experts that you have at your disposal. And thank you so much for your time.